Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and non-knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Marc Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is my brother, Shaquan Battle.
Yeah.
And to the right of him is our father, Jerome Battle.
What's up?
Been gone for a minute. We've been back. I'll take blame for that.
It's all of us.
Like I said, it ain't like we ain't been prepared. Like we've been prepared almost like every week to come in. It's like last minute. It's like I can't do it. Because we record on Sundays, and sometimes things pop up. Like again, like we're doing this as on our own time with our own families, juggling our own lives. But like I said, the show don't stop. We still gonna try to come back in here whenever we can to give out information to the people. How are you guys?
Good. I'm good.
Good.
Happy to be back, but I'm good.
Yeah, we're good.
Some people probably glad we were gone.
Yeah, honestly, I'm glad we gone too. We might have got banned on social media if we would have commented on a lot of that stuff.
Right on.
Yeah.
Considering how passionate we are about some things, yeah.
I think YouTube might would have shut down the channel. TikTok would have shadow banned us. They would have kicked us off.
I think it's important for me to say this. In a world where a lot of times we focus on who's not supporting or, who's hating. And, I'm just in a space in my life where I just only want to focus on the love and the love that, and we spoke about him many times on this pod, Chris Ridgway show whenever I see him, he pulled me to the side and, hey man, I love the podcast, keep doing it. And it turns into a podcast, but I'm okay with that because I know it's love.
That's right.
So I just want to focus on him, just always showing love to the podcast and to us.
I get that same response. I get a lot of people send me things like pertaining to Black history or things pertaining to what's going on that obviously isn't right or just all the time. Just like feeding information, which is awesome because it's not just they're feeding me the information for the podcast. It's the fact that they recognize it when they see it to even think about, this is something other people need to hear or see. So I think the awareness is what I like. So the love and the awareness about what's going on is awesome.
It's sparking something in them to even send it to you. So
yeah, I agree. And it's something that I had to learn because a lot of people I get my insight on certain situations. Whenever a new topic or something hit the news, a lot of people that I work with or that I know, ask me what my opinion is. And sometimes it's people that I know isn't going to understand in depth of what I'm saying. They're just asking because they want my opinion. And it leads to me to actually my first conversation. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I believe it's an important topic to talk about. I don't even have it down, but I think we can go off the cuff on this one. Is the conversation of the Black elitism from people who are intellectual versus the people who are not in the Black community, and how do we meet somewhere in the middle? For the people who don't know, on the Joe Budden podcast that I listen to, I know Shaquan listened to, Marc Lamont Hill, who is a intellectualist or activist and somebody, a professor. He's all of those things that you think about when you see him on the news and you see him debating people. He's one of those intellectual people from our community. And he joined the Joe Budden podcast last year. And sometimes on the Joe Budden podcast, he'll talk about the political stuff, the social awareness stuff. And just recently, he got into an argument on the show with Queenzflip. Queenzflip is somebody who's a creator who goes around doing a lot of, outrageous things for views. And he's a content creator. That's what he does. And the argument was somebody of the intellectual place and somebody who is not, he's not the most intellectual person. He'll tell you that, I hated school. I didn't finish school. They kicked me out of school, all of that other stuff. And some other intellectuals who, in the Black community went on their show and talked about how Marc Lamont Hill shouldn't be on that show. He's dumbing himself down to even have a conversation with these people. And it goes back to the conversation of, where do black people stop punching down on each other the same way that oppressors do? And I believe that even for me, I had to learn that, because just because certain people aren't where I'm at intellectually, or read the same books that I read, or study the same things that I study, it shouldn't stop me from trying to educate them or having a conversation with them to understand their perspective. That's what this podcast is. It's about the black perspective. You know, the books that I read, my brother does not read, but he brings something to this show that's important. And I believe the Joe Budden podcast do that too, because they are essentially a news feed.
Right.
Even though they may talk about some things that is just tea or just drama, but they also offer good perspectives on music. They offer good perspectives on what's going on in our community. And just because their insight is not Barnes and Noble book smart, it doesn't mean that they're not intellectual individuals who can give an opinion or perspective on something. What's y'all opinion on that?
I agree, because if you go back to these first couple episodes on here, probably the first 40, I said while I was on here, hey, I'm learning some of this in real time. Like sitting here, hearing you say it, I'm learning sitting here. And I think the ultimate part, with just going back to that show, the Joe Budden podcast, I think what happens is, because they tease Flip about, you know, his intellectuals on there, I think it gives other people think it's okay for them to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of happened in that situation, because Marc them kind of joke on Flip sometimes. And I think they think it's okay that they can do it because they seen Marc do it.
Well,
but
I don't even think it was that, because those people in particular on that show said that they never saw the show before.
Yeah. Oh,
so
okay.
By being that they just looked at Queenzflip and just heard that argument, I think they already kind of made it up in their mind who Flip was.
Yeah.
And just knowing Joe Budden from history of being in the news, they kind of just gonna put all of them in a box and say Marc Lamont Hill shouldn't be there.
And I also think Joe had a great response that he didn't have to further elaborate on, which was, y'all had the opportunity to sign Marc Lamont Hill when he didn't have a job anymore, and you chose not to. But like you said, it's many times that I may hear or read something and I'll bring it to you just because I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And you've never made me feel like, you're dumb for not knowing this or anything like that. But yeah, I agree with everything that Joe said on that show, as far as what he said about the other podcasts.
But the whole context bothers me, because there's multiple ways to understand certain topics that we talk about on this podcast. And one is through intelligence. So you interpret based on your level of intelligence and understanding, or you interpret based on your experiences.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So for people that believe that they are more intelligent than other people, their interpretation of this subject matter could be entirely different than somebody who's coming from, let's just say, a position of experience, and then my understanding how those things relate to these topics. In most cases, the person that is feeling like they're of a higher level of intelligence could actually learn something from the person who they deem to be of less intelligence, because their experiences regarding this subject matter could be entirely different than yours. Do you really think that people that are rich or that are highly intelligent, that are black, encounter the same type of discrimination and racism someone that's not of that caliber or even level? So what they endure on a day-to-day basis could be entirely different based on their experiences, which experiences sometimes can be dictated by your level of intelligence or your financial status, right? So to discount what that person has to offer, I think shows that sometimes people of higher intelligence lack a little bit of common sense. And also, they're also putting themselves in a privileged state. So let's be careful that when we talk about the privileged, we always say white privilege,
right?
But there's all other kinds of privileges, and some of it is intelligence privilege. And you got to be careful of that, because just because you might be the smartest person in the room doesn't mean you know everything. That don't mean you know everything.
Right.
Especially about someone else's experiences. So I think it's important that you weigh those factors before somebody demonize somebody for giving their account or interpretation of what this subject matter is.
I also think, back to you, Bake, you know, some people would say that you do this podcast, but on the flip side, you work in the correctional field. And, you know, how many times I've been with you at a restaurant or just anywhere, and somebody come up and be like, Stevens, and they talking to you, and I'd be like, Bake, who is that? You'd be like, oh, they was locked up for, you know, at this time. And just the way that they appreciate, you know, you. I think one guy even bought your family dinner when we went out, just thanking you for how you treated him while he was locked up. You didn't treat him like an inmate. You treated him like a human being that was locked up.
Yeah. Like I said, I just think it's important, because even with this podcast, you know what I'm saying? Yes, this is a Black history, Black perspective, unapologetic podcast. And even us sometimes, you know, we don't always talk about politics.
Right.
We don't always talk about history. You know, sometimes we may come in here, we may talk about sports, we may talk about music. All of that is part of Black news. And just because Joe Budden is just sitting there talking about Donald Trump for 3 hours doesn't mean that podcast or that platform isn't a good place for Marc Lamont Hill to be. Because a lot of people are, me personally, because yes, I listen to politicians, I listen to CNN, I listen to Fox, I listen to educational things. But a lot of mornings when I'm going to work, I just want to hear good laughs. I want to hear good conversation. I want to hear good music. I want to hear all these things. That's why I tune into Joe. And then from going on there, I can hear Marc Lamont Hill bring up, you know, the social awareness stuff that's going on, bring on somebody's trial that's going on, bring on the Palestine stuff. Like I can get all of that. And I believe they should appreciate Marc Lamont Hill being there, because places where some people may not go to your show because they don't want to get her and hear that 24/7, may get at least a dosage of it on the Joe Budden podcast from Marc Lamont Hill, to where they can do further research. And I believe that's important. I just believe history shows that, you know, W.B. Du Bois had this kind of mindset too with the talented 10th, that a lot of people, once they get a level of education or a level of wealth, that they begin to start to oppress Black people the way that white people do. And you got to be careful with that. You got to be very, very careful with that.
These also, you know, before Marc got on the Joe Budden podcast, they were getting a lot of information wrong on there.
Yeah.
When it came to topics like that. So what does Joe do? And those same people were getting on Joe them about getting the information wrong. So what does Joe do? He goes and hires Marc Lamont Hill, who can provide those facts and information, and then you still don't like that Marc Lamont Hill is up there.
And Marc's debate with some of them sometimes are really good debates, because, like, again, going back to what you said, Joe has experience, Ish has experience with certain things, that some of the things that's book for Marc Lamont Hill, Joe offers a counter perspective based on things that he's experienced and seen in real time. And even Marc Lamont Hill be like, yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. You can get that from somebody who do not have a PhD.
That's right.
Got to be careful, because some of the most intelligent people I know went to prison, including this man right here who don't have a college degree. He went to prison, and the people from this community that's Black, when they talk about Pops, they like, yo, that dude is smart. He's intellectually smart. No PhD, no college degree, none of that. And that's what you get from a man. But if somebody from CNN seen my pops talking, they were like, oh, you shouldn't get your information from him.
Right.
He went to prison.
Right.
Nah. That whole different type of perspective there.
That's right.
What else y'all want to talk about?
I know you. What you got?
I know you got a lot.
Actually, I don't. I condensed a lot of it. I can get to my stuff, but you go ahead.
I want to keep it at the history part, because at the end of this, I'll tie it together, but I think the history part is important. In just the recent few weeks, things have happened, listening to conversations, discussions, debates, watching podcasts and reels about racism, and then doing my own research, because I think that's the part that people don't realize that we do on this podcast is we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of researching, we do a lot of listening to what other people are saying, and in doing that research, the sentiment of a few, and very few Black Americans publicly known due to politics, including folks such as Tim Scott from South Carolina, Herschel Walker in Georgia, and then Candace Owens, somebody that we talk about a lot on this podcast. And you hear the sentiment from those folks that racism does not exist, or at least not at the level that we say it may exist. As if it existed to a certain degree, it would somehow still be acceptable. But not even that. But as Black Americans speaking to something that has plagued us in our communities, destroyed our communities in some sense, delays or denies our justice or our liberty or our peace or our pursuit of happiness or financial opportunities, business and community development, and our education and health, and even generational wealth for centuries, and saying it does not exist at the level we say it does, not only destroys the idea of equity and equality, but it hinders any progress. So any actions that's happening, this hinders that. And at times it stops the movement towards achievement in any form or fashion. But not only that, it then affirms that to white America, who already believes that racism doesn't exist at the level we say it does, that this country is founded, and it was not founded on the basis of racism, which I think that history proves otherwise, but ultimately that white Americans are not racist. And because this is what white Americans already believe, directly or indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly, this type of rhetoric silences the movement of equity and equality and general progress of Black Americans, which now being presented by white America as the woke movement. But not only that, having the voices of a few Black Americans openly affirming that racism does not exist in America at the level we say it does, that those voices of a few should be accepted and unified in the unified voice of America, including those of all Black America, is more surprising to me than those few Black Americans saying that racism does not exist at the level we say it does. So what I'm saying is, it's more surprising to me that white America would accept the voices of a few Black people to say that racism doesn't agree to the level that we say it does. And it surprises me, not because white Americans allow the voices of few to speak for all, because it's always been that way for white Americans. Developing their concepts, ideas, principles, and even laws, as long as those voices are in line or in agreement with theirs. So no, that does not surprise me. What surprises me is that they did not fathom the idea or possibility of what happens if a few voices of white Americans that agree with us that racism does exist at the level we say it does, ultimately keeps the debate alive, keeps the discussions and conversations happening, and the idea and the hope and the dream of equity and equality, diversity, liberty, peace, progress for Blacks in America alive, as well as the movement towards that. So
let me ask you a question. Do you think the few voices of the white people that says racism does exist is what's keeping racism alive? I mean, not keeping it alive, but keeping the conversation going versus all of the Black people.
I think ultimately it plays a huge part. And I know a lot of Black people don't like this, but history, again, proves this point, that for every progression that Black Americans have had in this country, it had to have the help of white Americans in order for it to happen. That's a fact. And just off topic real quick, if you think about it, let's just say 150 plus million people voted for the election in 2024. Donald Trump got 77 million. Harris got 75 plus million. So 150 million voters. Do you think everybody that voted for Donald Trump were Republican? The answer is no. Only 49 million people are registered Republican voters. But he had 77 million voters. Now, some of those could be independent. Some of those could be Democrat. Doesn't matter. But only 49 million were actually Republicans. So you typically have Republicans will vote for whoever they feel have the best interest for their families or neighborhoods or constituents or whatever. Democrats usually just vote Democrat no matter what. So, and that's usually what tells the tale of who's going to win the election in the United States, is how are those Republicans who sway gonna vote? Mm-hmm. We see it right now in Congress when they're trying to pass the budget bill. It's always depending on a few Republicans voting bipartisan. Mm-hmm. So that's always been the case. So when you think of that, there's already a lot of white people that understand what's going on in America today. The problem you have in politics is most politicians put their political careers ahead of what they think is right. They don't want to go against Donald Trump because they know if they do, they're out of a job. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Republicans don't necessarily believe everything that Donald Trump says, and they don't necessarily agree with it, but they want a job.
Right.
So they have to go with it. So that makes, so politics differ a little bit in terms of what people really believe. That this is a prime example when you look at how people vote and what party they vote for. But to further answer your question, so this begs the question: what would a white America say if you knew that there were so many white Americans who agree with what we're saying? Mm-hmm. Would they accept their sentiment as the accepted unified voice of America? If you had white people coming forward saying that racism does exist at the level that Black America says it does, would they accept that? Well, the answer is no. We already know that. Right. But let's go through it. If I ask somebody to name 5 white folks, 5 white Americans who fought against slavery and fought for civil rights, would somebody be able to name just 2?
Probably.
Well, most people would be able to name John Brown when it comes to fighting against slavery. Most people remember John Brown. I'll talk about him. Who was a radical abolitionist, who sued armed insurrection to fight against slavery in the 1800s. He led the raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 in an attempt to start a slave revolt, which terrified white Southerners and helped accelerate the Civil War. Now, like I said, most people would know a little bit about John Brown. He is in the history books, right? But let's talk about some people that most people don't know. A much smaller percentage of anybody could possibly name William Lloyd Garrison, who was a founder of the influential newspaper, The Liberator, which advocated for immediate and total emancipation of enslaved people, who also helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society. Most people never heard of him.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass. He did.
Exactly.
Frederick Douglass.
And in almost every case, if the question is actually answered by anyone, very rarely do the answer include women, which would include Angelina and Sarah Grimmicky in the early 1800s, who were sisters who were born into wealth and was a slave-owning family in South Carolina, actually. These sisters became prominent speakers after witnessing a brutality of slavery, and they spoke out against slavery. They also championed women's rights as well. What about Harriet Beecher Stowe, who in the 1800s authored the anti-slavery novel titled Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Yeah.
The book's powerful portrayal of slavery cruelty ignited public opinion in the North and helped energize the movement of emancipation. What about Lewis Tappan, a merchant who used his wealth to end slavery? a founder of the American Anti-Slavery Society, and he funded the legal defense of the infamous court case of the enslaved African in the Armistead case. As it pertains to the civil rights movement, we have folks like Ann Braden, a journalist and activist who helped organize white Southerners in support of the civil rights movement. She worked with Rosa Parks in organizing protests. In 1954, to fight against what's called redlining, we talked about on this podcast many times, she and her husband bought a house for a black couple in a segregated Louisville, Kentucky neighborhood. They were then charged with sedition of vilified by the community. Her husband was sentenced to 15 years in prison for that. He served like 13 or 14 months before he got overturned, but he was actually sentenced to 15 years for that. Viola Luoza, a white housewife and civil rights activist from Michigan who was murdered by the KKK while helping with the Selma to Montgomery marches. She was ferrying marchers from a protest in Alabama when she was shot and killed. Andrew Goodman, a college student from New York and Freedom Summer volunteer who was murdered in Mississippi along with James Chaney and Michael Schwerner while working to register black voters in 1964. The three were abducted and killed by members of the KKK. Most of the folks I just named, most people never heard of. Why? Because they were folks who agree with us that racism does exist at the level we say it does. Talk about some people you do know, but you probably didn't know this. Albert Einstein, the renowned physicist, was a member of the NAACP and spoke out against racism and segregation. In 1946, he spoke at Lincoln University, which is a HBCU.
Yep.
I assume that they told him, shut up and just invent. I'm pretty sure that's probably what they said. Yeah. John McCloy, a lawyer and government official who played a significant role in overturning the segregation in schools in America. He was instrumental in providing legal support for the plaintiffs in the Brown versus Board of Education. Here's one most people didn't know. Even Mr. Rogers, who I recently heard black people say that they thought he was racist.
First person to let come on that show, dip his feet in the water.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what Officer Clemens. And why was that important? Because white people believe that if you got into a pool while black people were in there, that the black would rub off on them and get on you. So he brought him on the show. Something else, and somebody sent this to me, something that I remember happening. I just couldn't remember when or who it was, but somebody sent me the clip. He actually did a little outtake with Eazy-E. When Eazy-E first left the NWA, Mr. Rogers did a little outtake with him, and it was comical. And since we're unapologetic and we're not on regular media outlets, I can say it. Mr. Rogers had Eazy-E on there, and they were drinking 40s. And he asked Eazy-E, he said, I heard you like Bofa. And he was like, Bofa? He was like, yeah, both of these nuts on your chin. Which proves, one, he was funny, but obviously he had the respect of Eazy-E to even say that to him.
Right.
But for somebody during that time in the 80s to have somebody like Eazy-E on a show where they did a outtake together shows that he was really about trying to help, at least in some sense, have the perception of blacks be viewed differently. So those are the kind of things that when you think about where we really are, what if white America accepted those views from a few the way they accept the views of a few blacks to say that racism does not exist? I just want to keep going. If you could not name just 5, in a society where something is established as a norm or a standard, when something exists outside of the norm or standard, typically it stands out. It's noticed. And depending on whether it's vile or morally wrong or questionable, or it goes against what we think is right or acceptable, we fight it. For example, in American history, when a black person moved in or attempted to buy a house in a white neighborhood or date or marry a white person, white Americans fought against it.
For sure.
Those acts stood out. They were considered vile or morally wrong, or it went against what white people considered as right or acceptable. So they fought against it. Yet, if the foundation of this country was not built on racism, and it does not exist to the level we say it does, that would mean the norm is there is no racism. So when people fight against racism, they would or should stick out. They should be noticed. They should be talked about. White Americans who fought against racism should have stuck out, should have been noticed then, and it should have been taught.
Right.
We should know about that if it was against the norm.
Right.
So obviously, it's not against the norm. Let's go a couple of more. So why can't most people name 5? Why should we be talking about Reverend Bruce Clunder, who in 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, civil rights activist who died when he was run over by a bulldozer while protesting a construction of a segregated school? Most people never heard of him. Reverend James Reeb, who marched with Dr. King, was a civil rights activist who was murdered in 1965 during the Selma to Montgomery March. He was beat to death. 3 men were tried for his murder, but just as so many cases in America, when a black American is killed by a white American, they were acquitted by an all-white jury. Mm-hmm. Here's the one that I think people will be interested in hearing.
So a jury of their peers.
Yeah. What about Reverend Robert W. Lee? Yeah, you heard me right. Descendant of General Robert E. Lee, who grew up in the South and initially had a sense of pride in his family name. But as he learned more about history, he came to believe that his ancestors' cause was tied to the continued enslavement of black people. He gained national attention after he began speaking out against white supremacy, specifically after he did so at the 2017 MTV Video Music Awards, following the protest of Unite the Right in Charlottesville that led to the murder of Heather Heyer. The one that, after the murder, Donald Trump said that there were good people on both sides. After Reverend Robert W. Lee appearance, he faced backlash from some of his members of his church in Claremont, North Carolina, leading him to resign. But after his resignation, he stated that the experience was worth it. Uh-huh. He continues to speak out against white supremacy and white privilege. Interesting point about Reverend Robert Lee. He said initially he had a sense of pride in his family name. But as he learned more about history, he began to believe that his ancestors' cause, whatever their mission was tied to the continued enslavement of black people.
This Robert E. Lee's people. Oh, okay, gotcha.
This is a descendant of Robert E. Lee. And he's saying what he learned about history. So history plays an important part, which is why we do this podcast, mm-hmm. which is why people like Donald Trump and his administration are trying to erase certain parts mm-hmm. and change certain mm-hmm. parts, is because they don't want you to know. Mm-hmm. History is important. Mm-hmm. Even this guy, without history, probably still would have been propagating the same things that his ancestors did about white supremacy and white privilege.
Absolutely.
If not for history, he would have been on the other side. Mm-hmm. But again, although there are white Americans, very few, that are speaking out and saying that racism does exist, they still refuse to accept that as one voice. But are quick to accept the voice from a few blacks that it does not exist.
Yeah, they'll go get your Officer Tatum's and
that's
some
right.
of these people and who revealingly talk about, black people. And one of the problems I have lately, and again, your religious beliefs are your religious beliefs. I have nothing against whatever religion you follow. But these black pastors in these churches who are going up in front of these audiences and saying negative things about black people to please your white audience, y'all are corny as fuck. And
part of the problem.
And a lot of these white pastors behind closed doors, they see you as an N-word too.
Right.
Yep.
Still
absolutely.
nigga.
Yep. Still nigga.
And even with that, and hold on, I'll get to that in a second. What do you got?
I'm gonna keep mine is local. I don't think we ever talked about it on this podcast. The Martinsville 7.
Yeah, we've covered it before.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, that's
But go ahead.
it was just I came across this video on YouTube, and 1951, 7 young black men from Martinsville, Booker Milner, Frank Harrison Jr., Howard Harrison, James Harrison, Joe Hampton, John Taylor, and Frank Grayson were executed for the alleged rape of a white woman. At this time, no white man had ever been executed for raping a black woman. These 7 were sentenced to death after lightning fast trials, flawed evidence, and no true chance at defense. Civil rights groups fought hard, arguing that it was racial terror disguised as justice. The appeals for the 7 failed. All 7 were executed within days of each other, the large mass execution for a single crime in Virginia's history. Decades later, 2021, Governor Northam granted a pardon, admitting their trials were poisoned by systemic racism. But the pardon did not declare the men innocent, but acknowledged that they did not receive a fair trial and were subjected to a racially biased death sentence. They were intended to help heal families, provide a measure of closure. So they thought that giving them that pardon would help heal the families. The 2 things that I thought was interesting was they said 6 of the jurors were on the list for the KKK. The other,
that's normal.
yeah. And then the other one is, so when you look at the comments to see somebody say, word is the white woman was in a relationship with one of the men, so she had to lie to make herself look good. My grandma said that it was a sad day during the execution, that the sky had gotten so dark. And then seeing all of the comments on there saying, hey, this is my family. My grandma talked about this all the time. Even one person said that Martinsville has been cursed by that since. That's why there's nothing there. But just to see all of the people comment on it, family members, who you can see it's a direct lineage of, because the last name is the same and the story is told, and it was not one white person on there that said that didn't happen.
Yeah, right. It's funny, when you look at, it's not funny, but when you look at, the historical aspect of some of those situations is, they'll look at certain situations where black people are killed and they'll arrest or bring up charges on somebody 40, 50 years later. Mm-hmm. And then, when black people are, wrongly convicted, if you got 40 or 50 years before they ever let out of prison, and they won't even say that they're innocent. They just say, that the case was, they shouldn't have been found guilty. But it's just that thing that there's no priority when it comes to black lives, which sort of leads into my topic. In 1968, Carol Jenkins, to supplement her income after graduating high school, she went on selling encyclopedias door to door. And to impress her boss in Martinsville, Indiana, was also known to be a sundown town. But to impress her boss, she wanted to go door to door in that area, thinking that she'll be safe and be gone before, the sun went down. And she also had 2 white men with her and another black girl that was going to be going door to door with her as well. But while she was en route, this car just kept following her, harassing her, throwing racial slurs at her from 2 white men that were inside. So she went to one of the doors and asked for help because she felt like she was in danger. And luckily, the 2 white people who lived there, Don and Norma Neal, called the police. And the police came, investigated, and figured it was just somebody, going around just harassing because she was black. And even then, Norma and Don Neal, again, good white people who were trying to help somebody, was like, you should spend the night here just to be safe. But she was like, I don't even want to bother y'all. Y'all have done enough. I'm gonna just be on her way.
That's black people for you. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And as Norman Neal walked several blocks with Carol to looking for her coworkers, they could not find them. And then they went on their ways. But about 30 minutes later, the two men got out of their car and chased her down, her arms behind her back, while one of the men stabbed her in her heart with a screwdriver. Carol's father insisted that due to racial past of Martinsville, that the police bring in the FBI to help investigate, but the police refused. Davis later said, I felt that because she was a black girl that nobody did anything. And 33 years later, they actually did find the killer. And they found the killer because their daughters were in the car as they killed this girl in 1968. So, in 2002, they got these two witnesses, the two daughters of the Ku Klux Klan members who killed her, and they told them what happened and what clothes the girl was wearing. And they did ended up arresting the person, but he never went to trial. They said he was incompetent to go to trial. This was in 2002. So from 1968 to 2002, again, goes back to what we said, and the only reason that they was able to investigate this because they got a unanimous tip to be able to go out there and investigate that. In 2001, Jelani Day, a 25-year-old African-American who was a graduate student from, I think it was Alabama A&M, and he was going to the University of Illinois, didn't show up to class one day in 2001. And the last footage they had of him was some surveillance footage of him going into a dispensary. And then a few days later, they actually, found his body an hour away in Peru, Illinois, floating in a river, which he could swim. But the tags were removed from his car. No keys. The clothes that he walked into the dispensary with was found inside the car. When they found his body, it was on September 4th, and they said that he drowned, but it took, a lot of work for them to be able to investigate this case. Gregory Johnson was allegedly found dead on November 22nd, 2008 at the Sigma Chi fraternity where he lived. Members of the fraternity claimed to have his body found in the basement hanging in a seating position with his legs in front of him with a heavy-duty extension cord tied around his neck. Gregory stood about 6'2" and weighed about 185 pounds, and the distance between the basement floor and the water pipe from which he was allegedly found hanging from was about 5 to 10 feet. Gregory's mother was not notified right after his death until several hours had passed. They had called students, they had called grief counselors, they had called the person who ran the fraternity house, who was already there when the mother showed up to the house to see what happened. But Gregory's body had no markings on his neck to suggest strangulation, which is odd because the police report stated he had been hanging for nearly 2 hours before his body was discovered, which there would have been some type of markings. When his mother got to the house about 1:30, the basement already smelled like pine sol. They had already disinfected the crime scene. The Grand Master of the fraternity was already at the house when they got there. And the police had riot squad van parked outside when they arrived. Now, why you need a riot squad for this, I have no idea. One of the fraternity brothers lied and said that Gregory's belongings was not there. And there was a phone that was left on the floor, and they tried to say that it wasn't his phone. But the sister-in-law recognized it was his phone and said it was his phone. When they picked it up and looked through it, all of his stuff was deleted from his phone. And of course, the coroner's office refused to let the Johnson family ID Gregory's body. They stated the fraternity brother who found Gregory dead had already ID'd his body. The coroner office told Mr. Johnson that she needed to raise a few $1,000s ASAP to have Gregory's body sent to Clear Lake, California, or else they would cremate his body.
Telling you what they're
going to do with the body is crazy. When Gregory's body finally arrived at the funeral home nearly 2 weeks after his death, Denise discovered a 6-inch crack in the back of his head, which brain matter was still oozing. This injury was not mentioned on the incomplete autopsy report that the Johnsons received. Gregory's neck was also broken. The FBI reviewed the case, considered it a possible hate crime. The 300-page report of the FBI was escalated to Washington, D.C. After following multiple requests under the FOIA, Denise Johnson only received copies of the first few pages of the report due to matters of national security. And that's what happens, you get, when you talk about fraternities, particularly a lot of these fraternities that's ran by white people, and you understand that these people are friends with judges. They are friends with lawyers. Yes, and even in the Kendrick Johnson case, who we know didn't die by rolling himself up in a gym mat trying to get his shoe. There was blunt force trauma there. But again, when you got investigators who know people and their children are involved, of course they're going to come out and say that it's no foul play. When you get Lennon Lacey wearing a shoes a size and a half too small, and somebody else's belt wrapped around his neck hanging from a swing set, knowing that a white male had threatened to kill him, and we think he committed suicide. That's what they're trying to tell us. You had Faraz Golden hanging from a tree in his own yard by a bed sheet with his hands tied behind his back with cocaine in the system and 0.334 alcohol level. Now, 0.08 is the alcohol limit in Virginia. He had 0.334, right? That's drunker than Cooter Brown is what they say. That's drunker than Cooter Brown. But they trying to say that he climbed a tree,
tied his hands around his back.
Or maybe because he was dating a white girl who was also the daughter of the police investigators. And we think that people like Trey Reed.
That wasn't too long ago.
Faraz Golden. Hold on. Let's Google it because I don't want to get it wrong. Golden was. Let's see.
I remember the case. I just can't remember what year it was.
Yeah, I don't want to get it wrong. We got Google. Hold on, audience. We got Google. We can just. Why ain't it popping up? 2003, maybe 2003. 2003. Yeah.
Not long ago.
Yeah.
Well,
but when you look at the other cases, you got Trey Reed that just recently happened. Robert Fuller. You had T.D. Gully. You had Malcolm Harsh. Do we really believe these black folks hung themselves from trees for suicide?
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to commit suicide. As a person who thought about committing suicide, getting a rope and hanging from a tree wasn't my option.
I'm just trying to figure out how would he climb the tree, then tie his hands behind his back
on cocaine,
and
0.3 alcohol
four times. No. 4 times the limit.
No. Nobody goes missing more than black women in the United States, and they get less news coverage, and it's not a priority for law enforcement. And I see all of these documentaries and docuseries that I watch because they're sad. When you see these white girls and white children get kidnapped and killed or whatever, they're sad. But where's our coverage? How many times have you turned on Netflix and the first thing that's in the spotlight is a case of a missing black woman or a missing black child? Did you see how long it took for them to actually take the Atlanta child murders seriously?
Yeah, they didn't take it seriously until they start thinking it was a black person, or a white person that was doing the killing.
It is because there's always a notion that
the minute Wayne Williams became a suspect, you saw it on the news every day.
That black women and black children, they run away. They're not victims. That's one of the first things that they say. And the white woman that's beat and battered and missing and dies is a victim. And that goes to show you that the way that they're treated are totally different. And my last thing I got, man, is it's a new segment. It's called If the Roles Were Reversed. MAGA pastor Brian Suave calls for executing rebellious black youth, citing death by stoning. If a black pastor said we need to execute white youth, what would be the narrative? Even though there has been a history of our children being killed and brutalized by white mobs. Another headline says, cops arrest 12-year-old black kid for recklessly driving his bicycle. The kid hit nobody's car, but the officer said that doesn't matter. He was still recklessly driving his bicycle into traffic and made an arrest. If this was a 12-year-old white kid, would the white kid have been arrested? If this was a black police officer who knows the neighborhood and knows the family, would that kid have been arrested or just taken back to their family and telling them what happened? 5 Illinois cops threatened to shoot black man after claiming he matched the description of a white man with a gun. Not one cop, not 2 cops, 5 of them motherfuckers. If the description was a black man with a gun, do we believe that a white man would have been approached by 5 cops as fitting the description of a suspect?
No.
MAGA maniacs crashed Tennessee's HBCU to push hate. If black nationalists went onto a PWI campus trespassing, do we believe they would have been escorted peacefully?
Arrested. If they were lucky.
A teacher was fired after posting a video at a school of girls singing Lauryn Hill out loud, and he called them ghetto bitches.
Oh shit!
Now I actually have a story. As I was leaving the Liberty football game a few weeks ago, it was actually for homecoming, and I'm going back to the parking lot. There's some teenagers, and one of the teenagers got his big truck, white teenagers, parked in the parking lot. Well, it's not parked. There's parking spots. He's like in the road outside of the parking lot. And he got rap music blasting. And there's 10 to 12 white people out there, kids, and they're just singing the lyrics out loud. They ain't bothering nobody. They ain't bothering me. I walked right by him, got in my vehicle. But if those was black kids,
They got a problem.
even some white parents walked by him and they just laughed and just kept going.
But those black
If those
kids
was
would've been a
black
problem.
kids with their music blasting, singing aloud in the parking lot, they would have.
You know,
they would have called the
allow
police.
that.
They would have
We
called
couldn't
police.
allow that.
And my last one was, Barack just did an interview, or it was an interview I just seen. I don't know if it was recently, but he was talking about if he would have sent the National Guard into white areas, what would have been the narrative?
Oh, absolutely.
Because when they're talking about sending the National Guard into DC and sending the National Guard into Chicago and Philly, they're only talking about certain areas where it's black people. They're not talking about the other crime areas that's with white people in this country. But that's my segment. I'll let y'all be the judge. If the roles were reversed,
You should have did that. The whole podcast should have been that.
I like that. I like that.
But that's all I got. Well, y'all got anything else for the people, for the calls?
We got one thing, man. Let me just get this off my chest, man. We purposely didn't talk about Charlie Kirk. And I just want to make this one point. Nobody deserves to die for their beliefs. Nobody. I don't care who it is. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they believe.
Right.
Nobody deserves to die for their beliefs. And we'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. Thank y'all. We love y'all. Peace.